Regulations shift, the stakes are high. The Mag breaks it down, no need to sigh. From EU rules to global news, Reg with Meg, your trusted views.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Reg with Meg. I'm your host, Tiffany Brown, and today we have a very special guest joining us, Daryl Wisdahl, Director of Consulting Services at MedEnvoy's U.S. office. With more than 25 years of experience in the medical device industry, Daryl is an expert in quality management system implementation, regulatory submissions, and compliance. Daryl, it's an absolute pleasure speaking with you today.
Well, thank you very much, Tiffany. This is a great opportunity to talk about one of those really interesting topics that impacts us all, and I'm quite excited to have the opportunity to discuss this with you today.
Excellent. So to kick things off, could you share a bit about your journey into the regulatory space and what drives your passion for supporting medical device manufacturers in their journey towards compliance?
Excellent. I started a long time ago, back in 1993 of all things. Right out of university, I got started working with a medical device company in Vancouver, Canada. And one of the things that was exciting for me was this was a smaller company, so you got to learn a little bit about everything at the beginning. So I learned a little bit about marketing, I learned about regulatory, I learned about clinical studies, and all of a sudden I became a clinical trial manager, and I managed a multi-center clinical trial, and that was quite exciting. I got to travel all over the United States to see clinical trial sites and hear stories from doctors about how the device I was working with was helping the patients they were treating. That was an exciting opportunity. I then went from there into sales and marketing, and I spent a year and a bit on the road as a sales and marketing product manager, learning what customers needed. And that was probably, if I look back on my career, one of the most important things I ever did was to learn what the customers really wanted. Because that helped me as I transitioned back into regulatory, really understand, why are my sales and marketing people pushing so hard to get this product approved in this market? It's not just because we want to make sales in that market, because there are opportunities out there. And then I would turn around and say, well, why aren't you selling the product? Now I have an opportunity to say, hey, I've been there in front of the customer and had the customer say no to me more times than they say yes. And so it was a very great opportunity to learn a little bit about all the sides of the business. I took that start and went now into a couple different medical device companies, mainly in regulatory to begin with. So FDA regulations, Canadian regulations, and European regulations, and then transitioned to also running quality management systems. Fast forward a few years, I ended up working with a company called Emergo, and I was a consultant with them for 15 years, having an opportunity to try everything. Regulatory submissions all over the world. Probably did 100 plus Health Canada submissions in my time there, probably about 20 FDA submissions. I then took over as a global manager for all of their internal auditing programs for their clients. And again, got to travel throughout the United States and a few places around the world to go and do internal auditing. Transitioned to MedEnvoy in 2021. Why did I do that? I wanted to go back to a startup company. I wanted to go back and try to build something new. When I was at Emergo, we went from my 25 employees when I started in 2005. When I left in 2021, we were probably 250.
Wow.
I started at MedEnvoy. We were 9 of us. What are we, over 50, nearly 60 people today?
Yeah, it's about 60.
It's a crazy thing. So I've been at MedEnvoy now for a little while, and again, working on regulatory and quality, working with customers as we've built the company and as we've learned how to interact with customers on these new topics that we're dealing with today. Today, we're dealing with things like import requirements. When I started in 1993, we didn't have to worry about an importer having to follow regulations. That was never something to concern ourselves with. We were barely worried about getting licensing approval or product approval. Now we have to worry today as a manufacturer, does my importer have the right things in place? Does my distributor have the right things in place? MedEnvoy has opened my eyes, and it's opened the eyes to a lot of companies as to these other requirements that are necessary for us to get products on the market. Now, you asked me a really great question, Tiffany. Why do I still do this? Why am I so excited about it?
Mm-hmm.
I just love watching companies go from concept to a product that gets created to getting through regulatory approvals to getting that product in the customer's hands. And then after that, I love watching customers succeed with getting audits done getting ISO 1345 certification, going into Europe, and knowing that myself and the company I work with, MedEnvoy, have had a little role to play in that, to see that success, and to see when the customer, I talk to them, whether it's face to face or whether it's by email, hear from them and they say, hey, thank you so much for getting us to this point. That is what gets me up every day. It really is. I love hearing back from customers of the success that they've had, whether I've had a little bit to play in that or a lot to play in that.
Speaking of customers, there's a lot going on lately in the news. This is the tariff episode where we're going to talk about it. So, can you give us a quick overview of the current global trade climate and how it's impacting U.S. medical device and IVD manufacturers? Or you could even go global and just talk about in general, just manufacturers all over the world, what they're going through.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that's really important to talk about was what is a tariff? A tariff has been mentioned as a lot of different things. The current president has said the tariff is one of his favorite words. Okay. But what is a tariff? And a tariff is basically it's a tax imposed by one country on the goods and or services imported from another country, whether it's to influence the country that they're working with to raise revenues or protect competitive advantages. Ultimately, tariffs make prices of goods from other countries more expensive, which can have the impact of converting customers to buy products from their own country. And that's a lot about what's happening in the United States, which is, hey, buy American again. Let's really focus on bringing technology back into the United States. And so that's what a tariff is. But what's going on today? Well, I was thinking about this yesterday as I was putting something together, and I thought about a quote from this famous British singer, John Lennon. He passed away in 1980, and John Lennon wrote this song called Nobody Told Me. And there's a great line in there that goes, nobody told me there'd be days like these. Nobody told me there'd be days like these. Strange days indeed. Strange days indeed. That's what life is today for us in medical device regulatory. It's a strange day indeed, because we did not expect this. We really did not expect this, what was going on. So what is happening? Well, we've heard the word tariffs. And one of the things that has been the biggest challenge is that everything changes from day to day. I was working on this presentation weeks ago, and then I looked at it again, and I had to scrap a lot of what I prepared because guess what? Things changed. One of the things that came out this week, just last week, was the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit has issued a statement upholding a finding of a lower court that said the tariffs that have been introduced by the U.S. government, by the President of the United States, are in excess of the powers of the President of the United States, saying these tariffs cannot legally be implemented on companies and on countries. Well, this ruling from the U.S. Court of Appeals doesn't actually take effect until the middle of October. So we know the White House has the power to, and as already found out, we've already found out, have gone to the Supreme Court to challenge this ruling. But this is why the discussion today is so important, because every day something new happens. And just sitting on our back and saying, oh, we got tariffs or we don't have tariffs, that's not the way we have to do things. We actually have to be thinking every day. And I'll talk about that a little bit further as we go through this.
Speaking of all of the crazy things that are happening, tariffs one day, tariffs no the next day, could you explain which products or devices are possibly the most affected by all of the tariffs? Are they all affected? Like, it doesn't matter what device type, or are some more affected than others?
Well, so actually, it's a great question. And it really depends on a couple of things. One is sometimes dependent upon the product, but more often it's dependent upon the country in which the product needs to get sold into. So one of the things that we forget sometimes is how tariffs work. So the United States has set a tariff on China that says all products being imported into the United States from China will have a tariff put on it. That tariff is then, is paid by the company who's buying the products in the United States, and then has to be passed on to somebody. Well, that same applies, the reciprocal applies, where the country that, like China, has now said, hey, U.S. manufacturers, before you can sell your products into China, before you sell your products into China, we're going to charge a 20% tariff on your products. So now all of a sudden, the products being shipped into China are now 20% higher. But one of the things that's really important to think about is, what is the biggest impact of this? Is it on the finished device? A couple of weeks ago, I sat with a manufacturer, the CEO of a company, in fact, in Southern California. He makes in vitro diagnostic products, and he's been in the market for 40 plus years. And I pitched this idea of, is the biggest issue on selling your medical devices and to global markets? He said, no, the biggest issue we have today is that we have to buy raw materials. We have to buy components to go into our products. And a lot of the raw materials that we buy come from overseas, whether that's China, whether that's India, whether that's Taiwan, whether that's Europe. All of these products that we're bringing into the United States to manufacture our finished medical device, whether we then sell it in the US or we export it to other markets, are having a tariff added onto them.
Oh,
At a bare
gosh.
bones minimum, every product comes in with a 10% tariff on it, all raw materials.
Mm,
Some countries, because of other actions that have been put in place by the White House, have had higher tariffs introduced. For example, China, as of August 11th, they've had a 20% tariff plus an additional 34% reciprocal tariff put on to all materials coming from China. Now, some of this may be delayed until November. And again, back to my earlier comment, this may all go away. But today, when a company wants to get raw materials so they can manufacture their product, they're paying somewhere between 20 to 50% more for some of their raw materials that they can't source elsewhere, or they can't source elsewhere quickly.
mm,
In our space, we can't just select any raw material manufacturer that we want to or supplier we want to.
right.
The requirements under ISO 1345 and the quality management system requirements of the United States FDA say that when we pick a supplier, we have to qualify them. When qualifying them means, are they able to actually provide us consistent product each and every time? Now, if you're buying a really critical component from them, let's talk about semiconductors or chips, for example. You can't just go and switch the chip manufacturer of your product because that chip has been specifically designed for your device. It may have taken months to get that designed and then months to get it turned into a finished device that gets shipped back to you. If all of a sudden there's, as what we're hearing right now as of this morning, that there's going to be a tariff of at least 100% added on to chips coming from China and Taiwan as they come into the United States. And right now we know that China controls about 60% of the market Taiwan controls about 60% of the market, if not more, for semiconductors and chips. That's going to have a dramatic impact. These manufacturers can't just go to find another manufacturer in the United States or another supplier in the United States to make that chip for them. As I said, they'd spent months designing it. And then once they selected somebody to make it, that company they selected spent months coming up with that to be able to build it the same way every single time. And you can imagine if this chip that's involved in your device is used for a blood pressure monitor, if it's giving the wrong value, all of a sudden you've got elevated or reduced blood pressure measurements, which could put the patient at harm. Now, another thing that we know right now is that also India has just had announced on it a tariff starting at 50% for raw materials. And if that material happens to be considered a pharmaceutical ingredient, which some of the ingredients used in vitro diagnostic products could be classified as a pharmaceutical ingredient, that tariff hits 100%. Now,
Oh my
if your raw
gosh.
materials are going up 10% or more, how are you supposed to be able to sell that product for the same price to your consumer,
He
to your
definitely
customer?
wouldn't. He wouldn't be able
Yes.
to.
But if you turn around and increase the price, and the other thing this CEO said to me is, a lot of times I'm stuck. He said, a lot of times I'm stuck in contracts, so I have to supply to this customer for the next year product at a particular price. I can't change that price because my contract says I have to be charging, let's call it $10. But if my raw goods go up by at least 10%, I now have to eat that 10% increase in raw material cost. That's
Gosh.
a massive hit to my bottom line.
And this is for manufacturers in the US, correct?
Yes.
So for ones who are outside of the US importing their IVDs or devices, what are the impacts they're going to be seeing with the tariffs? Like, is it higher costs, due to the raw materials, shipments are delayed. What would you say they would be seeing on the flip
A
side?
lot of That's a great question. A lot of that for them is the cost of their product getting delivered into the United States has gone up dramatically. If all of a sudden now the tariff, for example, some products coming from Canada come with a tariff of 35%. If that product comes from a manufacturer in Canada, is delivered to delivered to the United States before it is actually received in the United States, they've had to collect 35% tariff on the product, and that tariff is then sent to the United States. Who pays that tariff? Well, whoever's buying the product from that foreign manufacturer. So if I'm ABC company in Toronto, Ontario, or XYZ company in Beijing, and I'm shipping my product into the United States, all of a sudden my product, which I was selling for $10, now cost the customer $12.50, $15, $17. That directly impacts the person buying the product. That means the manufacturers outside the United States, where they used to be able to sell their device for $10, now their customers having to pay $15 for it. It's going to reduce the number of sales they're going to make into the United States. Customers are not going to want to pay 50% more for a product. Now, that means that for some companies, their ability to sell into the United States is going to be reduced dramatically. No longer will they have a competitive price advantage. No longer will they have the opportunity to go into certain contracts, because now the contracts are going to be impacted by automatically an increase in cost of 20% more. That cost is given to the company, has to pay it, who's importing it, the distributor or the hospital. But if it's a distributor, that cost then gets passed on to the consumer. So who really gets hurt here? Like, Tiffany, this is the big question that everyone has to
Wow.
answer. Who is getting hurt here when we have tariffs? So a foreign company is selling a medical device into the United States, and it's now costing 25% more. And maybe it's a product that can't be sourced anywhere else in the world, and it's costing 25% more. That cost has to be passed on to the consumer or to the hospital. Someone has to pay that. So it ultimately comes down to you and I getting hit by this the most.
Right, because I was like, depending on what side you're on, either you're a manufacturer and you're gonna eat the cost, or you're trying to import in and you're gonna have less people buying your stuff because what was once, $15, it's now 30, for instance.
Absolutely. And because there's such a change happening day to day, I started off with the comments of things change every day. I was working with a company, one of our clients in Midwest of the United States they're a manufacturer of medical devices. They were selling product to China, and the White House had announced a new tariff, and the tariff was coming to force on, say, Saturday. They shipped the product out with the entire plan that it would miss the tariff. So as long as it was on the dock and out the door by Friday at midnight, it wouldn't get taxed with the higher tariff. Something happened in the shipment with the courier, and it didn't get delivered or didn't get received at the dock until 1 a.m. in the morning. The tariffs came in. The tariffs went from a reasonable 10% to a 75% or 80% tariff for this product being sold into China. The
Wow.
customer, our client's customer, said, "We are not eating this cost. If you want this product to be received in China, you can either pay the 70% tariff increase, or we're not going to accept it, and you can have it sent back to the United States." So people are being impacted by this. Now, the problem was for them is they ended up having to pay that. And then a month later, those tariffs changed again. And what they paid as a 70% fine, basically, if you think about it, 70% incentive to the manufacturer, or sorry, distributor in China, now that 70% has gone down to 25%. Every day it changes. And so you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't.
So, Daryl, have there been any impacts affecting manufacturers shipping small quantities into the US?
Yeah, that's a great question. Just last week on August 29th, the White House moved forward with the removal of the duty-free de minimis exemption. Now, we probably have never heard of this thing called a de minimis exemption. I know I've never heard of it. But what this exemption is that, and it dates back to the Tariff Act of 1930, of all things. It allows shipments into the United States at values less than $800 to be shipped into the US without taxes, duties, or fees.
Oh, I've heard of this. This is very topical. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, no, it's great because, what it is that up until now, companies, and this can be apparel companies, so guys who sell t-shirts and companies who sell small medical devices that are like, $100 or $200 who are shipping onesies and twosies to a hospital or to an individual in the United States. They've been able to ship it with just identifying what the product is. There might have been a tariff on it that's been based on old tariff laws, but nothing that's been based on current tariff laws and new rules, right? So they might have had to pay a 5% duty because there's been duty laws that have been in place since 1930, as I mentioned. But now, as of August 29th, that exemption's gone away. And basically, any product that's being shipped to the United States, the shipper in that country, whether that's a postal service or whether that's a courier company, is required to collect the appropriate fee for the amount of the tariff for the product coming into the United States. Which means if I shipped my widget medical device into the United States and I'm shipping it to an end user in Minnesota, and I was able to sell it to them for $50. Now, with the way the new tariffs are going to be, it's no longer $50. It's now $75 or $80. So that customer is going to go, well, this is $30 more. I'm not paying for this. So there's going to be less product coming into the United States because of this. Now, you might be asking the question, how many products are we talking about? Like, are we talking, 100,000, a million a year? This blew my mind when I saw this number today. 4 million packages with a de minimis exemption are shipped into and processed by U.S. Post or courier services each and every day.
Oh my
4
gosh.
million products.
A
Now,
day.
all of these products are going to be subject to a tariff of some sort. Now, there's one caveat. If you've got a shipment that you're shipping to your family, so let's say you've got a cousin who's based in Iceland and they're shipping to you, or I have a sister in Iceland who's shipping you a package, and it's a gift and it's less than $100, there will be no tariffs on gifts shipped, or no taxes shipped on tariffs, or no taxes or tariffs on gifts shipped that are valued under $100. More than $100, or if it's a commercial product, those tariffs are in place right away. That means that small company, global small company who wants to sell onesies and twosies in the United States, and they were able to use this exemption up until now, that exemption's gone. And it's going to have a dramatic impact on those small manufacturers who ship onesies and twosies, the 1 shipment, 2 shipment, 5 shipments in the United States. Now they're paying tariffs on it. And this has resulted actually, and I mentioned it earlier, there have been some overseas postal agencies who've said, we're not going to process any of this right now. In fact, the United Kingdom on last week mentioned, until we figure out what we need to do, we're going to stop all shipments of commercial products by post into the United States until we know what we need to do. Now, that's been fixed, but that was stopped for a number of days because they didn't know what they were going to do. They didn't have the systems in place to process this.
What can they do to bypass that? Or is there anything that they can do at this point?
At this point, unless that exemption gets removed and or the suspension gets removed and they allow that de minimis exemption to be in place, I don't know if there's anything that can be done at this particular point. And that's why, of all the things that we talked about today, yeah, this is a small dollar number, but the small dollar number is those little guys, that little manufacturer who has, 4 or 5 people in their company who has the United States as a market. And it may not even be a device that's 510K cleared. It could be a class 1 device that they've been able to sell in the United States for 10 years without going to the FDA 510K clearance. Now, FDA is saying, go ahead, ship it to us. But the tax system says, and tariff system says, hang on a minute. We need to get more money out of you first. That's going to have an impact.
Right. And there's been recent news with the FDA, and that's also been a thing that's been changing every other week. But, we've seen budget cuts with the FDA. We've seen staffing issues with the FDA, layoffs. How would you say that's affecting regulatory approvals and inspections for manufacturers importing in to the U.S.?
Well, let's talk about the product clearance or product approval side of it first. So the FDA was required to let go about 200 to 250 employees by roughly April 1st of this year. So I was really interested because you asked the question to me in advance. Said, what is the impact on the review timeline? So being the nerd that I am, the statistical nerd that I am, I wanted to look at the data. And so I actually reviewed, and the FDA has a database that is publicly available that shows every 510K submission. So 510Ks are for medium risk devices that need to get clearance. So these are class 2 medium risk devices. And what I did was I compared the data for 2024 for how long it took FDA to do clearances of medical device submissions to this year. And interestingly enough, this year has been a bit quicker. It's just really strange. On average, about 15 days quicker than last year. But a lot of that has to do with in 2024, there were a lot of submissions. I mean, there were a lot of submissions that were over 500 days, legacy products that were sitting with the FDA for quite a while. And those got cleared out in 2024. So we're not really comparing apples to apples here. We're kind of comparing apples to oranges because the reality is the data, the submissions that were being reviewed in 2024 are different than the submissions today. But I can say with some confidence that it's not having a substantial impact today on your standard 510K submissions. Where my concern is on reviews is that FDA, as part of these layoffs, encouraged a number of people who are right at the end of their careers to take early retirement. These people in the review team have years and years of experience reviewing submissions. Now, all of a sudden, they're taking early retirement, or they may have been let go. And so the team that's replacing them that are going to be doing the reviews are not as seasoned as these individuals are, which means their time to review a submission probably is going to go up over time because they're going to have more questions to ask a manufacturer because they don't know the same thing about blood pressure monitors as Bob, who worked there for 20 years, did. Now this is only their 10th submission they've ever reviewed. They're going to have a lot more questions.
So,
you asked about sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to answer your second question, which was around inspections.
Mm-hmm.
It's a couple things here that's really interesting. One is at the beginning of this year, the FDA announced that they're going to increase the number of foreign inspections of manufacturers. That has a couple impacts on both the foreign manufacturers, obviously, and domestic manufacturers. There's only so many inspectors. The FDA only has so many inspectors. Some of them were, of course, part of that layoff process. But if we're increasing the number of foreign inspections, that means the number of domestic inspections are going to go down. So we know as a domestic manufacturer, if you're worried about getting inspected by the FDA, not for cause, but just for the general unlucky chance that FDA chooses your company, the likelihood of getting inspected has gone down today as compared to last year. Foreign manufacturers, even with the cuts in staff, those inspections are going to continue to go forward. So I don't think the reduction in staff is going to have an impact on foreign manufacturers' inspections. I think the change in the policy within the FDA and more importantly within the White House to increase the number of inspections globally is going to be the bigger impact. So manufacturers that are coming to the United States that are based in China or in Switzerland or wherever they are in the world, there's a greater likelihood of them having an inspection. And in addition to that, the FDA has taken the position now that they're going to do unannounced inspections, foreign unannounced inspections, which is something they've never done before. In the United States, it's always been unannounced inspections. The FDA could show up at your door at any time. Globally, when you're based in another country, even Canada, when I lived in Canada, I worked with companies, even the proximity to Canada, they still would call and say, hey, we're scheduling an audit, 4 weeks from now or inspection 4 weeks from now. Will this week work for you? That's not what they're going to be doing in the future. They could just show up at your door at any time, and that's going to have an impact. But if you're a manufacturer that's been selling into the United States for quite a while, and you're ISO 13485 certified, and you have a CE mark, you're kind of used to getting inspected and audited. You're kind of used to getting inspected without any notice because the notified bodies can now do unannounced audits of your facility based on CE marking. So I think overall the impact with the FDA changes from labor reduction isn't going to be as big of an impact for foreign companies, but I think there's still that chance that they're going to get more inspections happening. And if you have a device that's of higher risk that the FDA has a concern with, there's a greater chance you will be inspected in the future.
So, with what's been going on with the FDA, do you foresee any issues with slower innovation or compromised safety with all of the staff cuts and everything?
I don't know. I'm not sure that so far the data hasn't shown us that, and that's going to be really interesting to see what happens. Um, FDA produces warning letters when they go inspect facilities. A warning letter is something where they've reviewed a manufacturer's product or reviewed a manufacturer's facility and have determined that there's some compliance issues. We have to look at that, with an eye starting in, say, the beginning of 2026. We also have to look to see if there's an increase in the number of reportable events or device recalls. Something we could do today, but really won't be able to get a good handle on it until probably the beginning of next year, where we can look to see if whether there's been an increase in the number of reportable events, so serious incidents involving somebody's been injured or killed, where God forbid that happens, or there's a chance that somebody gets injured, or there's a recall because there's a problem with the product. We should be able to look at that data, in 2026 after a full year of 2025 to see whether this impact of reducing staff has had anything to do with the safety and effectiveness of devices. But one of the things I did notice that's been a change within the White House has been this increased emphasis on things like Make America Healthy Again, this MAHA process that's in place. And the current Health and Human Secretary Services, Health and Human Services Secretary has stated that he has this vision that every American is going to be wearing a wearable within 4 years. Wearables are used for a lot of things. Some of us use them for, communications. We catch our emails on our wearable. Sometimes we use them for fitness tracking. I walked my 6,000 steps or my 10,000 steps today. But other companies or people use them for things like monitoring their cardiology situations. So products like Samsung and Apple have their watches that do EKGs to measure your heart health. Now, this push by the Health and Human Services could have an impact on how products are regulated in the United States. How? We're not exactly sure, because if he's saying that they want to increase the number of wearables, that means more products are going to come into the United States. But the FDA has also taken the position that they will review these devices, even if they're not been submitted to them. So somebody's promoting a product on the web or promoting this product on some other service, the FDA gets wind of this, they will look into this. And recently, on July 14th, there's a manufacturer called Whoops that has a wearable that has a feature called Blood Pressure Insight. The FDA issued them a warning letter saying, hey, this product is what we call adulterated, meaning the product hasn't been cleared by the FDA or approved by the FDA. You need to stop selling the product. And because this product is making a medical device claim. Now, the immediate response from the manufacturer was, whoa, hang on, this is a wellness feature. And in essence saying, HHS secretary has been telling us we need to get more devices out there that have wellness features. So it's going to be an interesting time to see how many of these companies are either identified by the FDA and said, hey, whoa, hang on a minute, these are not wellness features. You're not just saying, you're getting 6,000 steps in, but you're getting a blood pressure rating of this, or you have a pulse oximetry rating of this. And whether that tells you to go call your doctor or doesn't tell you to call your doctor, that has a medical application associated with it. So I think that change probably will have an impact. Those kind of changes from the HHS to the FDA might have more of an impact than the reduction in staff, except for maybe the change with, as I said earlier, around the level of experience of some of the reviewers at FDA.
So I know you talked about earlier, you said that so far there hasn't been any delays with the FDA so far, even with the reduction in staff. But for the future, potentially, if there starts to be potential delays, what should manufacturers and regulatory teams prepare for if the review times become long?
That's a great question. And I think, if we're a U.S. company and they're looking at, bringing their first product to the market in the United States, or a company that's been around for a little while, they need to start thinking again of globally. If it's going to be delays in getting the product to market, should we be looking at other markets at the same time? It's something we've always said in the past, right? Look at other markets because the U.S. has been the slow market. And in the past was when I started in regulatory, the FDA is quite slow. Let's go to Europe first. And Europe's changed their regulations for the MDR and the IVDR, and their timelines have gone up dramatically. So companies have gone back to the United States and said, well, I can live with it being a little longer in the United States because it's still faster than going to Europe.
Right.
If submissions start consistently slowing down that timeline to review them, whether there's 510Ks for medium risk devices or high risk devices like PMAs or de novo submissions, companies really need to put a strategy together on what other markets they can be looking at. And the other piece of the puzzle that we haven't touched on here at all is reimbursement. If you've got a product that needs to get reimbursement for the use of that device, whether it's an MRI unit or that's a X-ray device that has some level of reimbursement associated with it. So the hospital needs to get paid to use that device, which then that somebody pays the hospital for that, whether it's an insurance company, whether it's an individual. When the insurances are involved, reimbursement is a critical piece. So when you're strategizing for the development of your product to go through the FDA, I think it's more imperative today to be strategizing with how long is the FDA going to take given reduction in staff? And I should also be looking at how am I going to be able to get paid for this so I can try to accelerate activities so that maybe I'm slower on the 510K submission, slower to get my product approved, but I'm faster in getting my product reimbursed. So now not only can I sell the product, but I can actually get hospitals to get paid for it. So it's a convoluted situation in the United States. If you're a foreign company trying to get to the United States, I think one of the things you need to look at is, first and foremost, can you use the pre-sub or Q-sub submission process or the 513G submission process to get more information around your device and whether the FDA's reviews are going quickly or not? Spend some time looking at predicate devices and how long they've been taking to get reviewed by the FDA. Monitor this because it might be helpful to be, again, looking globally rather than just at the US. So if you're in Europe and you're selling in Europe already, maybe looking at another market or a number of smaller markets rather than relying upon the United States right now may be the way. And that's not just because of slowdowns with the reviews, but also back to our earlier conversation on tariffs.
And to connect to an earlier question I asked, what strategic steps should U.S. manufacturers take? Because we talked earlier about the components that they're sourcing. They're hit with a 20, 25, 50% tariff. What strategic steps should they be taking if they're experiencing it, or if there's anything at all that they could be doing if that's happening to them?
That's a great question. I think there's a couple of things we can do. There's this new term called near sourcing, which is the idea of sourcing your material from a market that maybe doesn't have as high a tariff or from your own market. So if you're a US company, can I look at sourcing some of my raw materials? Now, that's a really good piece of advice for companies that are starting off or have a new device. So something new that they're developing right now, maybe I look at a broad range of suppliers. Where can I get the material from? Not just China or Europe or wherever else. Can I find something closer by that has either a lower tariff rate or is in the United States without a tariff? So in strategizing your development of your product, I think you need to be looking at suppliers that may be coming from a market that has lower tariffs or from a home market. If you've got a product that's already in the market, I think I previously mentioned that it's not something you can quickly turn around and change your suppliers. But I think it makes sense to start looking at where are my suppliers coming from? Where are my suppliers located? Are they in a market which has a higher tariff rate than another market? Can I get something from a local vendor? Maybe I pay a little bit more per piece, but I'm reducing my tariff risk on this because it is a risk, right? Because again, today it could be 25%, tomorrow it could be 50%, the next day it could be 10%. That's a lot of risk when you're trying to develop the pricing model for your product. So if you've got a product on the market already, maybe you need to be looking at other vendors to be able to reduce that risk to you, because that's a huge risk. And it's a risk to the bottom line, right? If all of a sudden I can get my material maybe at a higher per piece cost getting in the United States, but I can be reliably depend upon that price versus buying it globally with a variety of tariffs that could be introduced at any given time or removed, it might make sense to be looking that way. But I think you can't just rely upon one vendor anymore. The old days was we'd find a supplier, we'd work with that supplier forever. I think we need to be looking at different suppliers so that we can pivot if tariffs come in place or price increases happen for other reasons, or my product's coming from the United States, a supplier, but he or she has to buy it from, Europe or Australia or Taiwan or wherever the case may be, and they're facing tariffs. So I need to be looking strategically at the suppliers I'm working with and decide what is the best selection and don't just rely upon one company.
So have you seen manufacturers currently sourcing elsewhere to avoid tariffs, or is that still not a thing right now?
I think it's something that's happening. So the company I was with, this diagnostic company I was with 2 weeks ago in Southern California, they're reliant upon product that's coming internationally their for their finished product, but they are also looking at how can I find a source of this that's coming somewhere else. I need to start looking for multiple sources. So having multiple vendors approved that I can buy from. So it's not something you can change overnight, but I think companies are starting to do that. Unfortunately, some companies don't really have a choice. If you're buying chips for your product or semiconductor items, you don't really have a choice in many cases where you buy your product from, because there are not a lot of companies out there that make certain items that are necessary for your medical device, and you are really stuck with that. But plan in advance, and I think companies are starting to think about that when they're planning new devices today.
And I'm sure smaller companies, they're having probably a really hard time with this because they might have limited resources to be able to source elsewhere. What would you say that they should do to possibly keep costs down, stay compliant, stay competitive in this environment with all these tariffs?
Yeah, small companies are really the ones impacted the most. They can't really eat those cost increases the same way a Medtronic or a Abbott or whoever could address those increase in fees. For smaller companies, I think they really need to be looking at where they're sourcing their materials from. Absolutely looking at that because it is so critical for them. And if they're selling into international markets, they need to be thinking about the impact of that, selling that product into that market where the reciprocal tariffs have been introduced on their products. And it might mean they have to focus more on the US market for themselves for their sales efforts. It is a troubling time. Go back to John Lennon, strange days indeed. We don't know what's happening here. And
Yeah.
every morning I look at my feeds that come onto my computer and look at my Google alerts and such and say, "Oh, we had tariffs yesterday. We don't have tariffs today," or vice versa. And I think small manufacturers, they have to be keeping on top of this. They have to be on top of this, and they really need to be as agile as they possibly can. Maybe reduce selling 1,000 at a time to 100 at a time, so that maybe only 100 devices get impacted by the higher tariff, and the next time they sell the device into a market, the tariffs are lower. I don't know. It's every company has to take an approach that is probably the best for them. And given their size, they may not have that ability to have anything other than what's forced upon them.
Speaking of manufacturers, would you say IVD manufacturers might have specific challenges that they will face with the tariffs, in regards to things like raw materials?
I think the IVD manufacturers do, because a lot of and mentioned it earlier, a lot of the raw materials that go into diagnostic products are sourced globally. They're not so sourced locally, because there may be one or two companies that have come up with a reagent that is going to be used in your finished medical device, and they're the only company in the world that makes this right now. And they make it available to 35 or 45 medical device manufacturers globally. If they're in a country that has high tariffs, you're stuck. You don't really have an option. It's a very good, difficult situation. And when you add that on top of what we know with the in vitro diagnostic regulations, the IVDR, and those changes that are happening, IBD manufacturers are probably impacted the most by this uncertainty, really.
Wow. So that's interesting. To kind of switch gears a little bit, how are import-export controls and customs enforcement changing, especially for diagnostic products that become very critical, such as during COVID?
Mhm. Well, one of the biggest things that's happened is for products coming into the United States, there's a lot of issues with um, the country of origin where it's coming from, how they're shipping the product. And some countries have actually said now, we're not going to be shipping to the United States, or we'll only ship under certain circumstances because there are now tariffs that they have to collect as part of their process and pass to the US government. And they don't have systems in place to handle this. So
Right.
this is really, it's going to have a significant impact on companies when they're trying to ship globally, bring product in from international, I should say.
And kind of looking ahead with all that's going on, what trends or changes should specifically US manufacturers be watching out for in the next 12 to 18 months?
Obviously, the topic of tariffs is really critical. I think the leadership within the FDA and the Health and Human Services, I think monitoring what's going on there and the focus that they've had on healthy Americans, that's going to have a dramatic impact on, I think, on the products that get pushed the hardest in the United States. I think we need to be keeping an eye on that very much. Obviously, we need to keep an eye on review timelines within the FDA. So if you've got a product that's going to go to market, and you're going to be submitting to the FDA soon, I think do your due diligence, know in advance how long the average device takes to get through that. Because if you're expecting it to be 90 days, I'm sorry, that's not going to happen. In fact, less than 25% of medical devices are cleared by the FDA in their statutory 90 days. They have a requirement to clear devices in 90 days. Less than 25% of them are in that category right now. So I think for the next 12 to 18 months, I think it's absolutely important that as you're getting ready to go to market in the United States, be prepared for how long things are taking. Be prepared if there's a shift in your product. Be prepared that there's going to be new questions asked. So if you're a manufacturer of a product that's used as part of a vaccine, so knowing vaccine changes are happening in the United States, how that's impacting, that's going to have an impact on your product. Obviously, keep an eye on tariffs. FDA's critical tariffs
Right.
are also very important, and I think we have to be as agile as we possibly can. We have to be looking at other markets. We have to be looking at how our suppliers where we're getting our products from. Our suppliers are based. I think there's so much that we have to do today that we didn't have to do 12 months ago or 18 months ago to be prepared for tomorrow. Everything is different than it was a year ago or 2 years ago.
Right. Manufacturers have to be proactive now more than ever, with all this.
Absolutely. And like that company, the company that's been around for 40 years, they've been doing things the same way for 40 years. It's changed for them. Everything's changed for them now. And, for those companies, they have to be thinking now, how do I pivot on how I've been doing my process for all these years to something new? If I'm a new company, how do I prepare for what's going to change tomorrow? And I mean, the best thing you can do is, monitor what's happening in the world right now, monitor what's happening in the United States, and try not to be surprised, which is really impossible, almost impossible, but try not to be surprised, because if you're prepared for change happening and change happens, then everything is, you're okay. But if you're not prepared for change and all of a sudden now you're stuck with a 50% higher cost on your raw materials, your ability to sell into certain markets is going to be gone.
Right. So much change happening, Daryl. Every day, every week. So much
Absolutely.
change. Just to wrap up, if you could give one piece of advice to regulatory teams navigating what's happening now, what would it be?
Think global, don't just think local. Um, and really pay attention to what's happening within the regulatory markets of the regulatory markets that you want to go into. Changes are coming all the time. We're going to see changes happening in Europe with the way the regulations are put in place there. There's a lot of talk about having a more central regulatory review system. Pay attention to what's going on there. Pay attention to what's happening with the FDA. They've kept things going so far with less staff, but is that going to be the way it is, 6 months from now, 12 months from now? I don't know. But I think those are the two things that I would say from a regulatory perspective for my colleagues out there in the regulatory world. Keep your eye on what's going on. You've got to be paying attention every day. You just can't wait till the news comes to you. You need to be looking for the news.
Words of advice. And lastly, where can listeners go to stay updated on the trade policy, tariffs, FDA changes that might impact them directly?
There's a lot of great places to get that information from. I mentioned Google alerts, and I'm not promoting Google in any way at all, but there's one way to search. Our website, MedEnvoy, we try to put out the news as soon as we possibly can. We have a team they're dedicated to that. They're dedicated to looking for information that's coming in, and get that information out within the 24 hours. So if something new comes in that's big, it's important, we want to publish that as quickly as possible. Outside of MedEnvoy, associations like Regulatory Affairs Professional Society, RAPS, they do a really good job of gathering that information and putting it out. In the United States, organizations like AdvaMed, law firms like Reed Smith and Gardner Law, they publish every day updates that are happening, whether it's on trade law, whether it's happening on regulatory from the FDA perspective or global regulatory. I think those are places that you need to be looking at. If you haven't signed up for blogs, sign up for everyone you possibly can find. It's easier to delete an email because you've got it from somewhere else than it is to miss something. And then all of a sudden realize, what do you mean there's now a new requirement for me to have electronic IFU for all my devices of this particular type? Because you've missed an email, because you've missed that update. Sign up for as much as you possibly can.
Right. And lastly, do you have anything else to say to our listeners in regards to this topic, tariffs, anything helpful based on your insights and your expertise?
I think, working in regulatory and quality, it's always about change. Change is happening all the time. What I can say is that we're in this hyper state of change right now. Everything is different. We can't rest on our laurels. We can't rest on the experience we've had in the past. We can't wait for changes to be coming to us. We have to be prepared. We have to be thinking about tomorrow, and we can't just think about today. And I think that's probably the most important thing. I know it's pretty much, what everyone says, think about tomorrow, but I think it's more so today than it ever has been, because every day something's been changing in the regulatory space, in the compliance space, compliance including taxes and tariffs, the quality space, new quality requirements are coming in, and it is very much different than it has been in the past. With AI, with other social media, information's getting put out there so much faster. Get that information, soak it up as fast as you possibly can, and determine whether it has an impact on your product or your products.
Wise words. Well, that's going to be a wrap. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of Reg with Meg. If you found this discussion helpful, be sure to follow us on Spotify or your favorite podcast platform for more insights on global medical device regulations. To learn more about how MedEnvoy supports medical device and IVD manufacturers with in-country representation, consulting, or regulatory importer services, visit MedEnvoyglobal.com. Until next time, stay informed and stay compliant.